He hit the pit bull in front of everyone, not knowing who its owner was. A minute later, he was lying in the dirt, and the whole town froze. Watch until the end and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning light over Black Pine Bay was soft and cold, filtered through a veil of mist that clung to the treetops and curled around the porch railings like breath from a sleeping giant. The sea was barely visible through the pine forest, but its presence was undeniable, an endless hush beneath everything, as if the whole town breathed with the tides. A house stood not far from the cliffside, modest in its structure, wrapped in cedar wood faded by salt air and silence. From a distance, it looked like it had grown out of the earth. Inside that house, Ronda Rousey moved quietly through her kitchen, her bare feet padding across hardwood floors as she poured oats into a pot and added water without measuring. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but without tension. The woman who had once stood under stadium lights and faced the violence of the cage now welcomed stillness like an old friend. She wore no makeup. Her blonde hair was tied up in a careless bun. On her forearm, a faded scar traced a memory the public had long forgotten. At her side sat a dog stocky, broad-headed, golden-eyed a pit bull named Mochi. He followed her every move with quiet attention, ears perked, tail resting gently on the floor like he was absorbing her mood through the soles of his paws. He had once been a trembling, bruised creature behind the steel bars of a rescue shelter in San Diego. Now he was something else entirely, a symbol of her healing, a daily test of patience, a heartbeat beside her own. They ate together as they always did, Rhonda, at the small breakfast table by the window, Mochi stretched at her feet. No television, no music, just the distant cry of gulls and the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic. Her phone remained face down, untouched. She didn't need headlines. She didn't want headlines. The world had turned noisy, sharp-edged, and cruel. Here, she could forget all of it. Later, after a brief workout on the back patio shadowboxing into the wind, stretches under the pines, breathing with the rhythm of the earth, Rhonda clipped Mochi's leash to his collar. The dog trotted ahead with an eager gait, tail waving in wide arcs as they made their way down the winding path that led to the beach. Gull prints peppered the sand like ancient runes. The ocean stretched out flat and silver, and the rising sun began to burn away the mist. Rhonda knelt to untether the leash. Mochi didn't bolt. He stood there waiting for a word from her. When she nodded, he broke into a sprint, tongue lolling, paws kicking up wet sand. She smiled. No one recognized her in Black Pine Bay, and that suited her just fine. Locals kept to themselves. A nod at the general store, a half wave at the gas station. She was Rachel here. No last name, no past. She wasn't hiding, not exactly, but she wasn't ready to be seen either. People left you alone if you didn't ask questions. That was the unspoken law of small towns wrapped in pine. But even in quiet places, there were cracks. The first time she heard the names, Randall and Cooper was in the corner booth of the town's only diner. She had gone in for a black coffee and ended up next to two elderly women, knitting and whispering. "He pulled that poor boy out of his car like it was nothing," one of them said. "Didn't even give him a chance to explain. Cooper always acts like he's still at war. Got that look in his eye like he's waiting for someone to flinch. And Randall's worse. At least Cooper gets loud. Randall just watches, like he's waiting to hurt you and making a list." "Ja, fun." The other woman had shuddered. "There's law here, and no one dares say a thing." Rhonda had sipped her coffee without reacting, but she remembered the names. As the weeks passed, she noticed patterns. When the white patrol car rolled down the street, shopkeepers pretended to rearrange shelves. Conversations went still. Children were pulled inside. She saw Cooper once slam a teenager against a wall outside the hardware store for tagging a pole. She saw Randall giving a traffic ticket to a single mother for having a cracked taillight, taking far too long, his eyes never leaving her chest. She kept walking. She wasn't here to fix a town. She wasn't here to judge. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to breathe. Still, her body never fully relaxed. That kind of muscle memory never left. She could read a crowd's energy like a second language. In Los Angeles, that instinct kept her alive. In Black Pine Bay, it kept her distant. One afternoon after a long hike along the coastal ridge, she and Mochi stopped at the corner market. The bell above the door jingled, and the cashier, young, polite, forgettable, smiled and nodded. She picked up a bag of rice, some vegetables, and a dog toy shaped like a crab. At the checkout, the door swung open again. Two men stepped inside, one tall and wiry with eyes too calm, the other broad, unshaven, loud from the first step. Randall, Cooper. Rhonda didn't look up at first. She felt it before she saw it. The atmosphere inside the store shifted, the kind of tension that told you someone had a badge and thought that meant power. Cooper's voice boomed through the aisles. "You see the mud outside? Looks like he could bite through a fender." Randall laughed softly, grabbing a bottle of energy drink and some jerky. "Wonder if the owners registered that thing. Town's got leash laws, breed restrictions. Especially for pit bulls," Cooper added, louder, pointed. Rhonda didn't flinch. She placed her items on the counter, paid in cash, and walked out. Mochi was lying near the bench outside, just as she'd left him. He stood when he saw her, tail wagging, as if asking, "Did I do good?" She clipped his leash, walked home, didn't look back. But they had seen her. The next morning, she noticed a patrol car idling at the edge of the park where she and Mochi walked. Later that week, a neighbor mentioned offhandedly that the cops have been asking about the new blonde woman with the fighter dog. Still, she tried to ignore it. At home, she set down her groceries and sat on the porch steps with a thermos of coffee. Mochi rested his head on her knee. The sun was setting, painting the treetops in copper and blood orange. Wind rustled the pines. She exhaled slowly. The wind caught strands of her hair, twisting them like threads of smoke. She whispered, "We're okay." But somewhere in the pit of her stomach, a coil of instinct tightened. Mochi stirred, ears perked. The sea kept breathing, but peace had already shifted. Something dark had moved beneath the surface. Not loud, not fast, just inevitable. And Rhonda once again felt the first quiet ripple of a coming storm. The next morning arrived colder than usual. Mist curled low along the sidewalks, clinging to mailboxes and the rims of garbage cans like reluctant memories. Rhonda stood at the back door, cup of black coffee warming her hands, her breath fogging the glass. The sky was the color of bruised steel, and the sea beyond the trees had grown restless overnight. She felt it deep in her muscles, the barometric pressure dropping, a storm forming somewhere offshore, and not just in the sky. Inside, Mochi paced in slow circles by the door, occasionally glancing back at her, his eyes wide and expectant. He knew the routine. Breakfast, then their walk. The leash hung by the door, his bowl already cleaned out. Rhonda finished the last sip of coffee and set the cup in the sink. She slid into her hoodie, clipped the leash onto Mochi's collar, and stepped out into the cold morning light. They made their way through town in silence. Rhonda didn't wear earbuds, didn't listen to music. She preferred to hear the world around her. Cars passing, birds waking, the pulse of a quiet town holding its breath. Black Pine Bay hadn't changed much since she arrived. The same cracked pavement on Main Street, the same sleepy rhythm. But there was an edge now, something subtle, a watchfulness that crept into people's eyes and the way they closed doors with just a little more urgency. She walked toward the city park, a modest patch of green tucked between the bay and a playground. It was one of Mochi's favorite spots. A broad field of trimmed grass, a few scattered trees, and enough squirrels to keep him hopeful. Today there were only two other early risers, a jogger with a neon windbreaker and an older man tossing a ball for his retriever. Rhonda nodded at them and unclipped Mochi's leash once they reached the open space. Mochi took off in a playful trot, ears bouncing, his body light and joyful. He darted toward a tree, then circled back to her, tail a blur of happiness. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then the engine idled. A familiar hum, low and arrogant, rolled through the park's perimeter. Rhonda's head turned before she could stop herself. The white patrol SUV had pulled into the gravel turnout near the benches. The driver's door opened with a metallic groan, and Cooper stepped out, chewing on a toothpick like it owed him something. A second later, Randall appeared on the passenger side, his expression unreadable behind aviator sunglasses. Mochi froze. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but he didn't move either. Rhonda could feel the sudden tension in his posture from where she stood. "Well, well," Cooper said, loud enough to cut through the still air. "Look who's up bright and early." Rhonda didn't reply. She knelt beside Mochi, quietly attaching the leash. Her fingers moved smoothly, but her heartbeat had already begun its climb. "Funny thing," Randall added, stepping closer. "This park's in town jurisdiction. Breed restrictions apply. You got documentation on that animal?" Rhonda stood slowly, keeping her voice calm. "He's licensed, fully vaccinated. I have the papers at home if you want a copy." Cooper chuckled, shifting his belt. "That's so? Funny, he don't look like a therapy dog." "He's not," Rhonda replied evenly. "So what is he?" Randall asked, tone like ice on glass. "A fashion statement? You know what kind of dogs attack kids in parks, right?" Mochi let out a soft sound, not a growl, but something uncertain. He stepped slightly behind Rhonda's leg. She placed a hand gently on his head. "There's no issue here," she said. "We're just walking." "That's so," Cooper repeated. He took a step forward, then another, until he was inside the leash's reach. Mochi tensed. "Careful," Rhonda warned, her eyes narrowing. "Relax," Cooper said with mock innocence. "Just want to see if the little guy bites." Without warning, Cooper clapped his hands together in front of Mochi's face. The dog jumped back with a startled bark. Randall smirked. "Yup, aggressive response. That's a liability." Mochi barked once, unsure whether to defend or retreat. Rhonda tightened the leash and whispered, "Stay." But her voice was strained now, not from fear, from fury she hadn't yet released. Cooper looked at Randall. "Should put this one down. Make sure he doesn't chew on some toddler." Then with deliberate cruelty, he raised his boot and drove it into Mochi's side. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't a warning. It was a full-force, intentional kick aimed at the ribs. Mochi yelped in pain, stumbled sideways and fell, scrambling away with his tail between his legs. His body folded in panic as he crawled toward the bench and collapsed behind it, shaking. The sound high-pitched, raw-pierced something ancient in Rhonda. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat she stopped breathing. Around them, the park went still. The jogger had frozen mid-stride. The man with the retriever dropped his ball. No one moved, no one spoke. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Rhonda's voice cut through the silence, low and trembling, not with fear but with something colder. Cooper shrugged. "Just did what your mutt was about to do to me. Barking and lunging. That's how it starts." Randall added quietly, "And she raised her voice so I'd tread lightly." Cooper looked around. "Anyone got a problem, huh?" Silence. The jogger turned away and began to run again. The man with the retriever quietly clipped on a leash and walked in the opposite direction. Rhonda stepped toward Mochi, who was still curled behind the bench, ribs rising in quick, shallow breaths. His eyes flicked to her, then away, confused, ashamed, in pain. She knelt beside him, checked for blood. None, thank God, but the bruising would come. She felt the tremor in his body beneath her fingertips. "You okay, buddy?" she whispered. Mochi didn't respond, just let out a quiet whine and tucked his head against her thigh. Rhonda stood up. Her fists were clenched. "You'll be hearing from me," she said to Cooper, every syllable dipped in warning. Cooper smiled. "Can't wait." She turned without another word and walked away, leash in hand, dog limping beside her. Behind them, Cooper muttered something to Randall that made him laugh. They didn't follow. Back at home, Rhonda dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor as soon as the door shut. Mochi lay down beside her, ribs quivering. She pressed her hands to his fur, trying to reassure him. The anger hadn't faded. It had deepened, condensed, turned inward and sharpened like a blade. She had seen many kinds of cruelty in her life, in gyms, in cages, in boardrooms. But nothing had ever struck her so quickly or so personally as watching someone hurt something that trusted her to protect it. Later that day, she drove to the veterinary clinic on Birch Street, a small office sandwiched between a bakery and a laundromat. The vet, Dr. Weiss, was in his 60s, gentle-eyed, the kind of man who never rushed a diagnosis. He examined Mochi with slow hands and a sad frown. "Bruise," he said, "but no fractures. He's lucky. Another inch to the left and I'd be talking about cracked ribs." Rhonda's face didn't move. "Thank you." Dr. Weiss hesitated. Mind if I ask what happened? Police officer, she said quietly. In the park. He looked at her, long and hard. Then he wrote something in a file and said, come back in 3 days for a follow-up. And keep the receipts. You may need them. She nodded. Driving home, the weight in her chest grew heavier, not because of fear, but because of certainty. Something had shifted, and there would be no going back. That night, she didn't sleep. Mochi lay curled beside her, his breathing uneven, his tail twitching with phantom kicks. Ronda stared at the ceiling, her fists clenched under the covers, eyes wide open. They had touched what was hers, and the silence in the town, its refusal to speak, to witness, to act, was worse than the blow itself. She didn't want to fight, but maybe the fight had already come looking for her. The morning after the incident came without ceremony. Light bled slowly through the slats of the bedroom window, casting a faint glow over the wooden floorboards. Ronda lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the events of the previous day echoing in her skull like a drum. Every time she blinked, she saw Mochi's body recoil from the kick, saw the dull smirk on Cooper's face, the cowardly smirk of a man who knew no one would stop him. Beside her, Mochi lay curled at the edge of the bed, his breathing shallow but steady. He hadn't moved much during the night. Every shift seemed to bring him discomfort. His usual enthusiasm was replaced by something quieter, almost cautious. He didn't whine, didn't cry, but Ronda knew pain when she saw it. She sat up slowly, the weight in her chest pressing down like a stone. Her muscles ached, not from physical exertion, but from the restraint of holding herself back. She reached out, gently ran her fingers along Mochi's ribs. He looked up at her with tired eyes and gave a small thump of his tail, as if to reassure her that he was still her dog, still her friend, even if things didn't feel right anymore. I know, buddy, she whispered. I know. After feeding him, carefully placing his bowl near the rug where he liked to eat, she stepped into the bathroom. Cold water splashed across her face, shocking her out of the haze. She stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the one the world had cheered for in the octagon. Her skin was paler now, her hair longer, unstyled. But in her eyes, something had returned, an ember, one that hadn't burned in a long time. She dressed quickly and left Mochi resting in the sun on the back porch, wrapped in an old fleece blanket. Then she got into her truck and drove to Birch Street, to the small police station that sat between the town hall and a shuttered library. The reception area was quiet, almost unnaturally so. A ceiling fan spun lazily above. A young woman sat behind a high counter, filing something with absent-minded precision. She looked up when Ronda approached, her expression shifting instantly from polite curiosity to wary formality. I need to speak with whoever's in charge, Ronda said calmly. The woman blinked. Captain Blevins is in today. Is this about a traffic violation? It's about Officers Randall and Cooper, Ronda said. That changed things. The woman straightened her posture. One moment, please. She disappeared through a side door. Minutes passed. Ronda remained still, eyes fixed on a faded poster behind the counter, encouraging the community to respect and protect. Her jaw clenched. Eventually the door opened, and a short, thick-set man in a brown uniform appeared. His mustache was overly groomed, and his eyes had the weary squint of someone who had spent too many years behind a desk avoiding confrontation. You're the one with the pit bull, right? He asked as he extended his hand. Captain Blevins. Ronda shook it, firm, cool, unflinching. I am. Why don't you come back with me? He said, gesturing toward a cramped hallway. His office was small, with stacks of folders piled haphazardly on every surface. A small desk fan oscillated between two angles, doing little to move the air. He gestured to a chair, but Ronda remained standing. I'm filing a formal complaint, she said, about what happened yesterday morning in the park. Blevins nodded slowly, sitting down and opening a drawer. He pulled out a clipboard with a printed form. Go ahead. She relayed every detail: time, location, behavior, the deliberate provocation, the unprovoked kick. Her voice was steady, her words exact. She offered to provide the veterinary report. When she finished, he scratched at his jaw, then looked up. Well, here's the problem, he said, like a man settling into disappointment. There's no independent witness. You say the officers kicked your dog. They say the dog barked and charged. Now, even if that's not true, it's hard to prove either way. This is your word against two of my senior men. Rhonda stared at him. I have a licensed dog. I wasn't cited. They didn't file a report. They didn't call animal control. Why not? He sighed. I'm not saying they handled it right. I'm just saying it's a gray area. She folded her arms. A gray area is what gets people hurt. Blevins hesitated, then set the clipboard aside. I'll file the complaint. It'll go through review. But I'll be honest with you, it's unlikely anything will come of it. Rhonda didn't flinch. So you're not going to investigate? I didn't say that, he replied. I said you shouldn't expect much. She looked at the walls around her. Old plaques, faded photos, a certificate of commendation from 15 years ago. This wasn't a station designed for justice. It was a bunker of complacency. She left the station without another word. Back home, she found Mochi lying where she'd left him. He wagged his tail as she approached, but didn't rise. She sat beside him, her hand on his head. The air smelled of salt and damp wood. Birds sang in the trees, oblivious. I tried the right way, she murmured. They don't care. She stayed with him until the sun began to lower. That evening she trained, not out of habit, not out of discipline, but out of necessity. She moved through her forms with surgical precision, elbows cutting through the air, knees driving forward, combinations flowing with the ease of breath. Sweat dripped from her brow, and her knuckles stung with impact against the bag. There was no music, no count, just rhythm and fury. When it ended, she stood motionless for a moment, chest rising and falling. Then she turned and saw Mochi at the edge of the porch, watching her with calm eyes. Later after dinner, she sat with a notebook and began to write. Not a journal, not letters, notes, names, timelines, behavior patterns, what she'd seen, what she'd heard, who had looked away. She wasn't planning revenge. She was documenting. When the knock came, it was nearly midnight. She opened the door to find Dr. Weiss standing on her porch, his coat still buttoned. I just got a call, he said. Someone's been asking questions about Mochi, whether I think he's dangerous, whether I'd sign a statement about aggression. Rhonda stiffened. From the station? Didn't say, but you should know, people are stirring. She nodded. Thank you. As he turned to go, he paused. He's a good dog, a damn good dog, and you're not the first to file a complaint. Rhonda raised her eyes. No one else followed through? He shook his head. They left town instead. She stood on the porch long after he left. Stars glinted coldly above the trees. The ocean murmured below. She went inside, locked the door, and returned to her notes. There was something poisonous in Black Pine Bay, and silence was how it thrived. But she wasn't going to be silent anymore. The morning crept in over Black Pine Bay with a dense, leaden sky, the kind that pressed low and heavy, holding back light as if uncertain whether the day deserved it. The sea whispered somewhere beyond the trees, restless and unsettled. Rhonda stood in the kitchen, staring into her mug of untouched coffee, her body unmoving, her mind still uncoiled. On the porch behind her, Mochi dozed in a soft bed of blankets, tail twitching now and then, as if chasing something in his dreams. The bruises on his side were fading, but the memory in his posture had not. He no longer bounded out the door. He waited, watched, asked for permission with his eyes. The night before had left her with more than sleeplessness. Dr. Weiss's warning echoed in her mind, not just the words, but the way he had spoken them, like someone quietly confirming the unspoken. This town protects its own, even when those it protects don't deserve it. She had tried. She had done everything the right way. She had filed the complaint, remained calm, gathered documentation, restrained herself when every cell in her body screamed to act. And for what? A brushed-aside report, a suggestion to let it go, a veiled threat against a dog that hadn't hurt anyone. Mochi stirred, lifting his head as she moved toward the door. His eyes met hers. Come on, she said softly. Just a walk, nothing more. He stood, hesitated, then followed. They walked the long way, avoiding the park, tracing the wooded path behind the cemetery that eventually curved back toward the edge of town. It was cooler in the trees, quiet except for the crunch of dry leaves underfoot and the occasional flutter of a bird shifting overhead. Rhonda let the leash hang loose, watching Mochi sniff a trail, his gait still careful but returning slowly to confidence. She had trained her entire life to control impulse, to master instinct, to know the difference between rage and purpose. She hadn't come to Black Pine Bay to fight, but when the fight found her, she would not turn away. Later, she stopped by the hardware store. The old man behind the counter nodded politely as she picked up a few supplies: duct tape, heavy-duty zip ties, and a flashlight. He didn't ask questions. People in towns like this didn't unless they wanted to be asked back. By the time she left, the rain had started thin at first, then steady. Mochi walked close to her side, his fur damp, his head level with her hip. That evening, she worked out longer than usual. The punching bag she had hung from the porch beam months ago now swung violently in the wind as she unleashed on it, bare-knuckled and focused. Each strike echoed into the trees, sharp and deliberate. Not theatrical, not wild, just clean, relentless execution. Then came the voice. "Thought you were just a dog lady." She turned. They were standing at the edge of her property, just beyond the gravel line where the road turned to dirt. Cooper and Randall, civilian clothes. Beer bottles in hand, arms relaxed, faces casual. Rhonda wiped the sweat from her brow and stepped down from the porch, not toward them, but to stand between them and the house, between them and Mochi. "What do you want?" Randall took a long sip. "Heard you've been asking around, filing reports, stirring pots." "Big waste of energy," Cooper added, grinning. "Ain't nobody in this town wants to play hero. You're just noise." Rhonda's jaw tightened. She said nothing. "You know," Randall continued, taking a step forward, "a woman like you, I expected you'd know when to back off. Keep your dog on a leash. Keep your mouth shut. Things stay quiet." Rhonda took one step toward them. Cooper laughed. "Careful now. You wouldn't want things getting messy." Behind her on the porch, Mochi growled. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Cooper's grin widened. "Still got that bite, huh?" Rhonda's voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "Leave." Randall raised an eyebrow. "That a threat?" "Kurunam." "It's a promise," she said. For a long second, no one moved. Then Cooper tipped his bottle toward her, as if in toast. "You're fun," he said. "I'll give you that." They turned and walked back to their truck. Rhonda stood in the rain until their taillights vanished. The next day passed like a drumbeat. She waited for them to escalate, watched the streets when she walked, spoke little, moved carefully. People in town avoided her eyes now. She was no longer invisible, but she wasn't welcome either. She was a complication. Then came the evening. She was leaving the grocery store with a small bag of rice and eggs when she heard the noise shouting. A clatter of metal. A crash. She turned the corner and saw them. Cooper and Randall again. This time outside a roadside cafe, shoving a young man against a wall. He looked barely 20. His hoodie was soaked, his hands raised. No one intervened. A waitress stood in the doorway, frozen. A busboy stepped back inside. Rhonda moved before she thought. She reached them in seconds. "What's the charge?" she said. They both turned. "Obstruction," Cooper said. "Got mouthy." "He asked why we were pulling his backpack open," Randall added. The kid looked terrified. "Leave him," Rhonda said. "Or what?" Cooper stepped toward her, hands loose at his sides. She didn't answer. She handed the boy her grocery bag. "Take that. Walk to the corner. Don't run." The boy stared, then nodded and obeyed. Now it was just the three of them. "You just made a mistake," Randall said, stepping in. Rhonda breathed slowly. The punch came fast, a lunge from Cooper, meant to catch her off guard. But she wasn't off guard. Her left arm shot up, deflecting the blow. Her right elbow followed, driving into his jaw. Cooper staggered back, blood already in his mouth. Randall swung next, but she sidestepped, gripped his wrist, twisted, and dropped him to the pavement with a snap. Gasps erupted around them. Phones were out, cameras rolling. Cooper growled, wiping his lip. "You're dead." He reached under his jacket. She moved first. In 3 steps, she closed the distance, drove her knee into his stomach, caught his head on the way down, and sent him sprawling into the cafe's garbage bins. Bottles clattered, a chair fell. Someone cheered. Rhonda stood over them, breathing hard, shoulders squared. "This ends now," she said. The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later. His face was unreadable as he watched the footage on a witness's phone. Rhonda stood beside him, arms crossed. "Well," he muttered, "looks like self-defense with a side of cleanup." She said nothing. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "But this town isn't." That night she walked home alone under a sky that had finally cleared. Stars bloomed above the trees. The wind had softened. When she reached her porch, Mochi was waiting, tail wagging, eyes bright. She knelt and pulled him close. They had crossed the line now. There was no going back. But finally, for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight begin to lift. The following morning unfolded slowly, with a lightness in the air that had not touched Black Pine Bay in weeks. The sky had finally shed its gray shroud and opened itself to a rare blue calm. The wind that had once scraped at windows now carried a softness that whistled gently through pine branches, rustling the needles with a kind of contentment. At Rhonda's home, the stillness wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. She sat on the back steps with a cup of tea instead of coffee, her eyes scanning the tree line, as golden light trickled across the clearing. The porch, once a station of watchfulness, now felt like part of the sanctuary she had hoped it would be. Beside her, Mochi lay sprawled in the morning sun, his head turned sideways in peaceful sleep. The bruising was gone now, both on his body and, it seemed, in his mind. His movements had regained their freedom, his posture, its pride. He barked once at a squirrel and chased it halfway across the yard with a confidence she hadn't seen since before the park. She smiled, not because it was over, but because something had changed, not just around her, but within her. She had stepped into the storm and come out unshaken, not untouched but still whole. There had been no official charges filed, no trial, no courtroom drama, just video, just truth. The sheriff had reviewed the footage from the cafe, gathered statements from witnesses, and handed the results over to Internal Affairs. Word spread quickly, even in a town that preferred its secrets quiet. Randall and Cooper had been placed on unpaid administrative leave within 24 hours. Less than 48 hours later, they were gone. Sheriff Nolan stopped by her property that morning, a plain manila folder tucked beneath his arm. His truck rattled up the gravel path and rolled to a stop. She didn't rise to meet him. She waited on the porch while he climbed out and walked over, boots crunching on stone. He held out the folder without a word. Rhonda accepted it silently and flipped through the documents inside. A final incident report, witness statements, a copy of the veterinarian's letter, an internal memo from the sheriff's office confirming the resignation of both officers. No lawsuits, no appeals, just signatures. "They moved out last night," Nolan said. "Left before sunrise, took what little they had and drove east." Rhonda nodded. "Smartest thing they've done." Nolan scratched at his jaw, clearly uneasy. "I owe you something, or maybe the town does." "I'm not looking for favors," she said. "That's not what I meant," he replied. "We've been quiet too long. Folks saw what you did. They saw what right looks like when it's not wearing a badge." She said nothing. He looked down the path toward the trees, where sunlight flickered through the leaves. "You know, I've worn this uniform 32 years. Thought I understood justice. Turns out I forgot what it looks like when it stares back at you without blinking." He stepped back toward his truck, but paused. "You ever think about working with dogs again? Maybe training them?" Rhonda tilted her head. "Why?" "Because we've got a town full of people who don't know the first thing about discipline, but they're suddenly real interested in listening." She didn't answer right away. He took the hint, nodded, and climbed back into the vehicle. "Folder's yours. Keep it, burn it, whatever helps you sleep." As the truck disappeared down the road, Rhonda stood and looked out over the trees. In the distance, the bay shimmered silver in the sun. Mochi came up behind her, nudging her leg with his nose. That afternoon, the town felt different. In the diner, people spoke her name quietly but with respect. The waitress who had once only offered small talk now refilled her coffee without asking and called her ma'am. At the grocery store, the cashier who once stared at his shoes looked her in the eye and said thank you. But it wasn't fear they offered, it was gratitude. Not because she had fought back, but because she had stayed. Someone had even started printing shirts. She saw one on a teenage girl outside the post office. A pit bull silhouette and the words, "Mochi lives here, don't be stupid." At the vet's office, Dr. Weiss greeted her with a knowing smile. "Town's a little louder now," he said. "That's not a bad thing." "I didn't want it to be about me," she said. "It isn't," he replied. "It's about all the times people didn't stand up, and the one time someone finally did." When she left, a woman she didn't recognize stopped her by the truck. Middle-aged, thin voice, and nervous eyes. "I have a son," she said. "He's 9. We walk that park every weekend. Thank you." Rhonda only nodded. Words weren't needed. That night, as the town slowed again, a black SUV rolled into Black Pine Bay. It came without sirens or notice, gliding quietly through the narrow streets. It parked outside the diner, and a man in his 30s stepped out. Neatly dressed, laptop bag over one shoulder, sunglasses tucked in his pocket. Inside, he ordered coffee and asked the waitress a question. "I'm looking for a woman named Ronda Rousey. Heard she saved a dog. Heard she saved a town." The waitress grinned. "You're 2 days late, but yeah, she's around. You'll know her if you see her." On the edge of town at the small ranch by the sea, Rhonda sat by the fire pit with Mochi curled at her feet. The flames flickered low, casting their dance against the wooden beams of the porch. She tossed a stick into the fire, watching the sparks rise into the night. The wind had shifted. The air no longer carried threat, only salt and pine. She looked down at Mochi. "You're back to full strength." He wagged his tail once and sighed contentedly. She leaned down and scratched behind his ears. "Next time someone thinks about hurting you, maybe they'll think twice." Mochi closed his eyes, and for a moment, the world was still. Justice didn't always come with gavels or courtrooms. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in bruised silence, in broken fear, in an unwavering refusal to look away. Ronda Rousey had not come to be a symbol, but some things find you when you're strong enough to carry them. The town would sleep peacefully tonight, not because danger had vanished, but because someone had reminded them it was possible to stand up and say no. She stood, looked to the stars, then stepped inside. Behind her, the dog she saved followed without a sound. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see what happens when justice takes an unexpected turn. And don't forget to share this video. Someone out there needs to see it.